Hi, everyone. Um, Welcome to our panel presentation on assessments and assignments for remote learning. We're thrilled you're here. We have a fabulous turnout, and we have some fabulous panelists. We have Michelle Tomasik from physics, Barbie Huey from mechanical engineering, and Craig Carter from DMSE. This event is co-hosted by MIT's Teaching and Learning Lab and MIT's Open Learning. I'm Janet Rankin. I'm the director of the Teaching and Learning Lab, and my co-facilitator today is Aaron Kessler from Open Learning. We also have Ryan McDowell, Lourdes Alman, and Deepa Shah from TLL, and Molly Ruggles from Open Learning on hand for support and questions in the technical questions in the chat, and any other help we can provide. I want to say a few things about logistics for the day before we continue. We're using Slido to facilitate Q&A during the session. So you can ask, you can post your questions throughout the hour. And if you have questions for specific panelists, you can put those in there and we'll try to address them in between panelists' comments. And we may try to answer Slido questions as appropriate right there in Slido as we go along. And the link is in there and perhaps will be posted again shortly to Slido. I'd like to turn this over to the comments over to Aaron Kessler, who'll provide a little bit of context within the science of learning that will give a really good underpinning for various aspects of the assessments and the assignments that will be showcased today. So Aaron?
Thank you. Hopefully everyone can actually see that. So yes, hopefully, yep, thumbs up, great. So thanks for coming. It's great to see this many people interested. As Janet sort of mentioned, my job this afternoon is to sort of situate the work of assessments in the MIT context and the broader sort of literature. To begin, let's all remember a couple of months ago, APART made a recommendation to minimize high stakes assessment, especially during this time of remote learning. This action has sort of opened the door to considering all types of alternative assessments, maybe some that a lot in the group maybe never considered before. It turns out this recommendation is actually in line with what we know about people learning more generally. Notably, the following quote from the National Academy Press book, How People Learn Too, summarizing some key work from the education research and domain-specific learning research states, there are two related implications. The first, undue weight should not be placed on a single assessment of learners' knowledge and skills. And second, memories are reconstructed more easily in situations that feel conducive and relevant to the context of the memory. This second point, noting the importance of reconstructing memories, in other words, sort of remembering, is connected with ideas later in the book. So almost 100 pages later of discussing really well-cited and seminal pieces in the literature, the authors go on to say, assessment can drive the process of learning and motivation in positive direction by providing feedback that identifies possible improvements and marks progress. It is most effective when the design of assessment reflects understanding of how people learn, which begs the question, what do we know about how people learn and supporting it? So I want to frame this around a couple of key points that we often highlight in our materials in open learning and that the folks over in TLL also highlight. The first one being regular low stakes testing encourages what's called retrieval learning. So it allows students the opportunity to engage in low stakes with the materials over and over again, improving their opportunity to learn and contextualize that learning in different settings. Two, regular feedback that is actionable by the learner is critical. So it's not just good enough to give feedback and say, you did this right or you did this wrong. It's then giving them an opportunity to engage with whatever that feedback said, whether that's being through revision or whether that's applying the knowledge to new settings or new problems, but it needs to be that sort of next actionable step that becomes really important. And then three, authentic assessments and assignments help students learn more and promote deeper understanding. Getting them to do the work in real situations or modeling as close to real situations is really important. So we think about this maybe including things like presentations and poster sessions. that can be highly motivating and afford opportunities for that feedback and then result in deeper learning. So a number of faculty and people across the Institute have been thinking about this very thing. And today's panel is no exception. And I'm really excited and thrilled for their stories today. It's going to be wonderful. Most importantly, if this triggers any ideas for you or you're interested, please reach out to me or TLL if you have interest in exploring alternative assessments further. If you're interested in understanding more about how technologies such as Canvas can help with your instruction and support student learning, or if you're interested in doing some of your own disciplinary-based research, we're here to sort of have some of those conversations. I'm going to hand it back to Janet. Janet, thanks. Hopefully that situates the work for the conversation. I'm excited for what's ahead.
Great, thank you so much, Aaron. So our first panelist will actually talk about frequent retrieval of information, and that's Dr. Michelle Tomasic. She's a lecturer in physics and a digital learning scientist in open learning. Michelle will tell us how she and her team used more frequent exams and lower stakes assignments in introductory physics, 801 and 802 in MIT lingo. And thank you, Michelle.
Great, thanks, Janet. All right, so I am here, as Janet said, to talk about the introductory physics classes. And if you've heard anything about 801 and 802, you've probably heard about TEAL. So we already, before moving online, had a lot of small assessments throughout our course that really emphasized just showing up and doing the work, whether or not you got the right answer. We already had a lot of those. But this opportunity to move online actually had us change several things that flipped sort of farther in that direction. So actually including really flipping the classroom way more than we had before. And I'm happy to talk more about that in the questions. But as Janet said, I'm really here today to tell you about how we made a difference in our grading of our summative assessments, how we made those lower stakes. So we did two different things. We made them more frequent. Instead of having a few midterms and a final, we had several quizzes and a final in both 801 and 802. And we lowered the total worth of the overall test score. And this actually relates to what I said earlier about further flipping the classroom. So we really emphasized even more in our grading structure the learning opportunities as opposed to the summative testing part. And so in both classes, we actually reduced our total weight down from 70% down to just 50% for all of the quizzes and final combined. And I guess I can actually share this with you. I have our schedule. This is just, for example, the 802 schedule, and I highlighted in yellow all the quizzes. So we basically had a quiz every 2 weeks throughout the semester, and then a final exam. So the way that we ran these quizzes and the exam is we used MITx. So we were using MITx anyway. And so it was sort of, the students had practiced using that platform because they had to use it for everything else in the class. And we used timed exams, which if you haven't used before, I think are great because they really offer a lot of flexibility for the students. So we ended up having our exams open for between 24 and 32 hours to accommodate different time zones or scheduling conflicts. And then once the student starts the exam, they only have a limited amount of time to do it. And we did, although we did end up giving something like 1.5 to double the amount of time we would have given for comparable questions on campus. And part of that is to like deal with internet issues or MITx input issues, but also part of it is just the way we were grading. You know, you only grade that final answer. So there's the partial credit. We did a little scaffolding, but the partial credit is a little different. So we really felt like we needed to give students a little bit of extra time to sort of make it comparable. We do know so that we did achieve at least one of our goals. So from surveys, we know that student stress around quizzes was pretty low this semester, which was never true of our midterm exams. And the comparison of how much students really learned is a much harder comparison to sort of do. We do actually have we had a few quizzes online in previous semesters, which are pretty similar. And we did actually end up giving a written problem that was the same problem as a written problem before. So we do have a few ways that we compared. And it looks like students did better or the same this semester than they did in previous semesters. So I think students ended up learning about the same amount, if not more. And it seems like their motivation for studying for these exams and the quizzes was not reduced by the fact that we had them worth a lower amount. And actually, as Erin said, I think this frequent testing was actually great because it made us pause every 2 weeks, and it gave the students a whole day to reflect on their learning over the last 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. And I think this really helped solidify for the students all of the different new material that they were seeing. So we managed to lower student stress while I think keeping the performance equivalent. And the one tiny concern that I do have is cheating, which I'm sure all of you have around your sort of test-like assessments. We heard a little bit about cheating the past spring. We actually didn't hear any this past semester, so I don't think it was a huge issue. But we are still thinking about our approach for the spring, but we're definitely going to maintain many low stakes quizzes and exams. We're definitely going to emphasize the pre-class, the in-class, the after-class learning experiences way more than the exam performance. And we definitely want to maintain maximum flexibility for students if we can. And I'll pass it back to you, Janet.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. We have a few questions in the Slido, and I think we have time for them, so that's fabulous. One was there were no slides, so you didn't miss anything. The other questions are, given the practice of going to smaller, more frequent exams, why bother with a final exam at all? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, actually, we thought a lot about that because we really did want to get rid of the final exam if we felt like we could. But I think in both 801 and 802, there's sort of a lot of problems that really, it's sort of helpful to have questions that could have come from anywhere in the course, because you really want to have students practice all of those concepts together and really retrieving the right base of knowledge rather than, the quizzes were, what did we do in the previous 2 weeks? And maybe some from earlier stuff, but there wouldn't be an entire question that was just from week 1 in the quiz in week 8.
Great, thank you. And then along similar lines, was student stress also lower for the final? Do you have any
We didn't actually do any surveys, after the final or either right before the final. So I don't have sort of like the big numbers. Looking at the evaluations, nothing jumps out at me as showing any stress. I mean, there were some students who were so not stressed about it that they didn't show up for the final. But only a handful in each of the classes, but they didn't need it to pass. So I think a lot of students the stress was pretty low.
Great. Another one, do you offer makeup quizzes?
Yeah, I forgot to say that actually. This was amazing. So in the past, we have always had to offer between 1 and 3 makeup midterm exams for each exam. And we did not have to do that this year because everybody was able to find time sort of within that window of time that we had the quizzes open. And if something happened and we found out, somebody wasn't able to take it for a couple of weeks, the exams, we had waited sort of like a week usually to release solutions. So we had at least a week buffer period to offer that same exam anytime.
And did you offer final makeup exams for, yeah, never mind. I'll skip that one.
And the final we had open for 24 hours also. So there were no issues with that.
Okay. And then did your subsequent quizzes weave in material from earlier quizzes or earlier?
Just in the nature of the physics courses, it certainly has to. I mean, everything really builds on itself, but we didn't have a question that would be like entirely just Coulomb's law, like first week material in week 8. So it was interweaved with the other material.
Great. Then we have some questions, just maybe, I think we have room for maybe 2 more. Are you considering doing online quizzes when we're back kind of in the physical classrooms? And would that be doable? And then another thing, I'll piggyback.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
About the quizzes. would you would that allow for flexible timing? And have you thought about that?
Yeah, so we actually had experimented a little bit with online quizzes even prior to this, but we had given them in person, which actually made it much easier for us to prevent sort of cheating or whatever, because we actually only had the answer checker on MITx, and we handed out a paper copy of the problem to the students as they walked in. So we knew they had to be there, and then we could sort of walk around and see what questions they had. And it felt more like a normal exam, but they were very short. I mean, they were like half-hour quizzes that we gave. And I think we were actually looking to expand this even before going online, the idea of having these frequent quizzes online, just because it's fast and easy. But I do think, I mean, I actually do think part of our experience tells me that I think a lot of the instructors do not are not happy with this, but that I actually think it's really important for us to have some hand graded problems. And I really I think we need to have a bigger opportunity to have more hand graded problems. And that's part of what we're discussing for the spring. As I think actually as instructors, it gives us really valuable feedback about the specific points that the students are missing. And as painful as it is to grade 700 exams, it really is a good learning experience for us.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll continue to respond to questions as they come up throughout the panel, and you can ask them at the end as well. Thank you, Michelle. Our next panelist is Dr. Barbara Huey. She's a senior lecturer in mechanical engineering, and today she'll describe how she used Virtual Chair and the GatherTown platform to run virtual poster sessions in 2671 measurement and instrumentation. We should note that these apps are not part of the suite supported by IS&T, but it's also very useful to learn about these things and think about their affordances compared to what we have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Janet, and thanks for inviting me. So first I want to start by saying it was nice to hear Erin's talk, because I think actually we've already been doing this in 671. I looked up, we have 21 graded assignments, which vary in weight from 1 to 8%. So we already have that. And then in addition, we have, it varies from term to term, but about 21 in-lecture activities that are worth 20%. So again, those are all about 1%. I did want to talk about the thing of frequent quizzes. The lecture quizzes, when they were developed, were really quizzes, but they really weren't. They were really attendance gathering devices. So as long as you had a brain and could look at the last things, you could fill them out. And we started before the pandemic hit last spring. I worked with a colleague who took over the lectures, and we tried to turn them into lecture activities. And so that the grading was almost binary, because in the class that I teach, it's more they learn by doing things or learning by thinking. We're actually thinking of recalling, of changing the names of these activities. And I'm going to throw this out here because all of you are much more expert in learning philosophy, but we were thinking of guided learning activity, which is things like doing a lab or a pre-lab or a post-lab, where we kind of tell them step by step how to do it, and critical thinking activities, which is more, we say, okay, you're going to write a proposal. What do you want to say? Things like that. So anyways, but to come back to the topic at hand, the way 671 is structured is we have lectures with the activities, as I said, we have labs, and then we have the Go Forth and Measure project, and we are a CIM. So there are, of those 21 assignments, I think 9 are on the Go Forth and Measure project, and it's a lot of writing and then getting feedback and then rewriting. So we're kind of already doing these kind of things, and we didn't really change the types and number of assessments that we used because of the pandemic, except that of course they all went online. So now I can jump and talk about the posters. Oh, actually, I'll say before that for the ones that I'll call critical thinking activity, which is, these worked quite well in lecture, because we would put small groups of students in breakout rooms, and then staff could circulate or answer questions, and they would talk to each other. And there was a lot of peer-to-peer learning going on, which was really fantastic. So we were really happy with how that worked in the virtual environment. So using breakout rooms. So for the poster session, at the end of each term, we usually have 2 days of poster sessions. It's an hour and a half each one during lecture time. And we have this fall, we had 69 students. In the spring, I'll probably have about 80. So it's of order 35 to 40, sometimes up to 50 posters in each session. So you can't ever see them all. It's too much. And what we did last spring was we just did it on Zoom with students in breakout rooms. Not even breakout rooms. Each student had their own Zoom room. And that worked, but it wasn't very nice for either the students or even the visitors that much. It was hard to navigate. The students, the main issue I had was the students couldn't browse and look at their friends' posters if they were presenting, because of course they couldn't leave their Zoom room. And that's a large part of the learning of this assignment. It's really their final, they write a final paper as well, but the final poster session is really where they get to show off what they've done. And it's a really wonderful experience for them. And I have fun every term putting the posters next to each other. They don't even know what their peers have been doing. And so they lost that. So this term we went to, we talked to GatherTown, and they pointed us to a company called Virtual Chair, which is in Chicago. And I think it came out of Northwestern, which kind of made the poster session room. So I'm just gonna briefly share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. So this was our poster session. So there are 36 posters there, and the presenters would stay on their rug. And if I zoom in like to this one that has a lot of people on it, you can see there's people on that sort of rug, and then all those people could talk to each other. So you could actually walk down the hallways with your little avatar and kind of see what the posters were. And then if you wanted to talk to the presenter, you'd step onto the rug. They keep improving their setup. So in the spring, we will actually, the presenters will be able to point at things on their poster. So it should become even more like a real poster session. And the feedback from the students was really good. They, there were issues with, they were sharing their screen, and that didn't always work well. They couldn't see the people they were talking to sometimes. So, there were snags, but they generally felt that it really was, almost like being in person, and they really had good conversations. They did wander off and were happy to go look at their friends' posters. So I would say that was a real success. As Janet said, it's not included, and GatherTown, but the company was Virtual Chair is what we used to create the space. You can create your own space in GatherTown, but that would be pretty complicated for something like this. And so this company has been developed. They create, the woman I worked with told me that they created like a more of a convention center type thing with 1,000 different, stations, posters, whatever. So the cost was for these 2 poster sessions, which total time was about 2 hours each. They gave us support before and after, and you're charged by how many attendees, because they have to allocate enough servers to it. So we did 120 attendees. So for these 2 poster sessions, it was about $2,100. So it's not crazy, especially since when it's in person, I end up printing all the paper posters. If I didn't print them and we sent them to Copytech, it'd be, I don't know, 80 or 90 bucks a poster times 70. So that's a pretty high number anyway. So I think that's about all I wanted to say. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Great, thanks so much. A lot of positive comments in the chat. And also someone wants to know, is Virtual Chair based on an underlying the platform GatherTown, which you answered, yes it is. And then does it have the same 50 participant limit?
No, so that was what I said, is that you could make it as many as you want. They just charge you more because they pull in from Virtual Chair. So we had 120, but you could have many more.
Great. And then can a visitor to the poster session zoom right in and clearly see the detail on the poster?
Yeah, so the way we did it, those posters that you saw in that space were actually placeholders, because they wanted the posters, a week to a week and a half before the poster session. And since I hadn't scheduled that time in, the students would not have finished their final posters. In the spring, we're actually going to have the poster sessions a week later. So those placeholders you saw will be the actual posters. And so then a visitor can come and just zoom in. That was the problem with the students sharing their screen, was the visitors, both on Zoom and the way we did it this fall, was that the visitors couldn't zoom in. It was very hard to see stuff. For the second of our 2 poster sessions, I actually put all the posters on a Google Drive folder, and then the link in the schedule that was in the virtual space, there was a link to each poster. So you could just click on it, and then the person viewing it could pull it up on their screen. But in the new one, they'll be able to zoom in and look at different parts, and the presenter will actually be able to point to things on it, which they weren't able to do. So, yep.
Great, thank you so much. And then our final panelist is Professor Craig Carter, who's a member of the faculty in Material Science and Engineering. He's a McVicker Fellow and has received the MIT School of Engineering Bose Teaching Award. Today, Craig will discuss how he used video-based projects in 3016, Mathematics and Computation for Materials Science, for Material Science and Engineers, to support and assess student learning. Craig?
Thank you, Janet. So the class that I teach emphasizes computational thinking for material scientists. There's usually about 30 to 35 second-year students in this class. And the way this class is taught is they learn how to code to solve physical problems, and then they learn how to visualize those physical problems. In the class, there is about 5 open-ended problem sets where students develop a computational narrative supported by some visualization and then turned in. The alternative assessment method that I've been using now for about 5 or 6 years is that I ask the students for a final project to construct 2 4-minute videos. One of the 4-minute videos is a narrative designed to be pedagogical, where they take a particular physical phenomenon, something that they're learning in their other courses, and they construct a computational model and a visualization. And what I tell them is that they should think about the peers in their other classes and try to teach them a concept that you found to be difficult in your other classes. So that's part 1. That's one 4-minute video. The second 4-minute video is an explanation of the code that they use to develop that particular assignment and the visualization. So altogether, it's 8 minutes. I won't accept anything more than 4 minutes long for any one video. Students often write back several years later saying how useful that particular exercise was. Students are often surprised how much time it takes to put together a very short video. I do warn them ahead of time that it takes longer than you think. I fear that that causes a bit more stress than I want it to, but then again, students say that they enjoy spending their time putting together these videos. And that's it. That's my alternative assessment method.
Okay, thanks very much, Craig. There's one question in the chat, and that is, are the videos done individually?
Yes, so each student turns in their own video, which is nice because I view all the videos and students know that they can't cheat, in effect. If they do borrow some code or ideas from other people, I give them a very earnest talking to about citing properly.
Okay. And then what's the form of the feedback you give students? Is it?
So what I do is, as I watch the videos and a TA watches the video as well, I type up notes of my impressions of the video as the video goes on. So they get a set of notes. There's also, in the last week of class, something called movie night, where all the students come together, and students who wish to have their videos shown have them shown, and then I ask other students to give them feedback. That tends to work better than I thought it would. I thought most students would be a little bit too shy to give critical feedback, but they do rise to that occasion, which makes me happy.
Do you give any prep to the students about the feedback, about like guidelines for the feedback, or it's whatever?
So because I have several years of these videos, what I do is I give them a couple of videos, and the video quality ranges from things that I thought were just okay to things that I thought were very good. And then I also do one where I say, this I think would be a high quality video if you could put something like this together. So at least they have a model on what they can do. Students tend not to follow any template that I give them, and that also makes me very happy. They tend to get a bit creative.
Great. There's a couple questions in Slido. One is, do you support students with tools or techniques, tools or techniques and best practices for actually making the videos?
So I tell them about particular software that sits around to make video. I don't tell them how to make videos, but there are plenty of how-to tutorials out there on the web about how to do that. So those are much better quality than what I could possibly give them.
Great. And then there's another question. Do you assess both the students' understanding of what they teach, as well as whether they used good pedagogical principles and practices? So both their understanding and their kind of teaching, or just one or the other?
Yeah, so I suppose that this is a bias of mine, and that is, if you can teach one thing very well, then you've clearly demonstrated that you understand the topic. And so that's one part of it. Because the class is about computation, they have to use these kinds of tools that I teach, how to code up a model of something, how to visualize. And so I can see directly, it's a bit like an oral exam, whether a student has incorporated those concepts I wanted to teach into the video. I don't know if that answered the question, but I hope it did.
Okay, and then Cheryl has a question in the chat. Why do you think students find it to be so useful years later? Like, what do you think it is specifically that makes it so useful?
So here's what I think, and I don't know this for sure. The one is how much preparation time it takes in order to put together a narrative, which is very short. It requires you to organize your thoughts and make a storyboard. Students who go out and do presentations professionally benefit from that particular exercise. I have some students who are now in graduate school and beyond, who now, when they interact with their colleagues, instead of describing something with slides, they make a short video describing their result and just give them the video. And this is something I have also been doing to communicate science with my colleagues. And I think it's pretty effective. So students have written. I have one student who now hosts a video channel in Catalonia because she's Catalonian, and it's about science visualization. So she clearly benefited from this.
Great. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers, all of our panelists. At this point, we have plenty of time to open it up to general Q&A. What I'm going to do is open my participant list, and if you can raise your hand, I will call on you in the order that your hand appears in my list. Also note that a couple of the questions have been answered in Slido, so if you click on your question, if it says reply, it means we answered it. And then Barbara answered the question about the how the posters are made. She answered that in the chat, the actual chat for the presentation. Barbara, do you have something you want to say?
Yeah, it's sort of a comment question while they're figuring out how to get Ellie to unmute herself, which is to sort of support what Craig was saying, is that because we're a CIM, I mean, in my experience, it's the question that Cheryl asked, that what really sticks with the students is the communication assignments and directions we give them. And that I think doing an oral presentation and having them make a video, I mean, we've had them do oral presentations, but having them make a video feels like also a really helpful thing to them, because it's really the communication skills are what they're going to carry with them forever.
Great, thank you. Ellie.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself earlier. Anyway, I wanted to get back to, I love the idea of the video instead of a final. I have to think about that, how to do it, but I will try it. But I wanted to get back to the question of the quizzes, where you know, we used to have quizzes, and I wanted to be able to do these short 10-minute quizzes at the beginning of the class, which is what we used to do every other class. And the question is, can we do that in real time in a synchronous class? And I've asked some of my advisees what they liked in classes that they've taken. And one of them has told me that Gradescope was a really good way of doing that. And could you tell us about that, or give us some information or other suggestions how to do that? I sort of was thinking that maybe a 10-minute quiz gives less opportunity for cheating and things like that, that you have to do in real time, because you can't waste your time chatting with other people during your 10 minutes.
Right. I know certainly Canvas has that affordance, but I'm going to let the folks from Open Learning jump in on that. Cheryl, Aaron, whoever's here, Molly.
Actually, could I just say we used Canvas and they have a really nice quiz structure, and the students preferred that to, like, you can also have them submit assignments, but the quiz structure is a lot easier for them because they just type things in.
I guess my advisee said you can do it through Canvas, but Gradescope is better.
So it depends on what it is that you're trying to do in terms of the types of questions and the structure you want to have and the functionality you want. For basic quizzing, like Barbara mentioned, Canvas can handle that. If you want more advanced features, yes, Gradescope can sort of give you some of those affordances. The nice thing is Canvas and Gradescope are integrated. So the Canvas sort of setup allows you to just link directly to the Gradescope pieces and vice versa, sort of have them in there. So it's sort of some nice functionality. And yes, it really depends on the types of questions you want to ask and how you want to structure the quizzes and the cycles of the quizzes as to what the best tool is. But both of them are available and provide sort of different functionalities depending on what you want. And we're happy to have you reach out and we can talk more about what some of those options might look like.
Okay. You don't want to say something about the functionalities now, or when you would choose one or the other?
Sure. So I think it becomes a question of like the type of question, right? So and the structures. So in Gradescope, you get more options beyond just maybe a multiple choice and some feedback, and you get more options in terms of how it's rolled out and the way you can enroll students into that quiz. That functionality is far more advanced in Gradescope.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Can I actually add quickly to that too? The one nice thing about Gradescope too is that if you have a lot of students, and you have, more importantly, if you have a lot of graders, it's really easy to apply a consistent rubric, because you just put your rubric in there ahead of time, and then you just sort of check like this apply, and that's all you have to do. And so everybody is using the same grading rubric for that problem, if what they've uploaded is like a PDF of a problem.
Great.
I think Canvas can do that too. And I actually did want to say something else about giving feedback, like what Aaron was talking about, is that if you aren't using Canvas, the thing that's awesome in Canvas is that it's easy to co-comment on papers. It's easy to comment on papers, but then we have technical plus WRAP instructors co-commenting on papers, and that is really smooth in Canvas. It's the best platform we've had so far for doing that.
Great. Thanks. Paula has a question.
Hi, thank you for the presentations. It was very inspiring. So I wanted to ask everyone in the room for their opinion about what would be the best strategy to grade final projects. So as a background, last semester, we taught physics at ESG, so the equivalent of 801 and 801-2 in small classes. And we had 30% of the grades for quizzes and there were one quiz every other week. And 20% of the grade was for a final project. And we created a rubric for this final project, but I thought, and Analia is also in the room, I think she can comment on that. It was very difficult for us to grade it. So we split different topics such as physics mastery, teamwork, effective communication, creativity, and I think creativity was the hardest to grade, timeliness, and we also had some points for peer assessment. And each of these criteria, they were both for the content of the final project, the final presentation, because they were presenting to everybody else, and also for the proposal. So I wanted to ask this group if you had any ideas on how we could improve our final project grading process.
I can jump in on the high level. So certainly breaking it up into those categories and having a person grade everything in that category, if possible, is the fairest way to do it, right? Because that way there's no disparity in how somebody views something. So that's a great way to do it. In terms of your categories, did you have criteria outlined within the categories about how, what needed? Yeah. So that could be something that could be very helpful if you talk about creativity and then you say, you got either give examples about something that you consider to be like 5 points of creativity or 2 points of creativity or 0 points for creativity, or you come up with particular characteristics that you're looking for with respect to creativity. And loosely that's loosely that's a rubric. But you can also share that with the students as they're preparing their final projects, because then it tells them what you're expecting, and it can help them focus their learning and their work. So that's a really good thing to do. But those tweaks might help you get a better product, something that is more higher quality. But I'm sure others would like to jump in from either TLL or open learning.
Yes, thanks. I'm answering. Yes, the students were giving the rubric in advance, and they also had some examples from the past year, because we had done it also before, something that we thought, oh, was really well done. And we are trying to increase this gallery so that the students have other examples. To be honest, instead of having each of us grade for a single category, we found it more effective to have each of us grade 5 projects, or I don't remember the number of projects, just because it required really a lot of time to understand exactly what they were doing. And then we met and we discussed to adjust for, everybody thinking differently, like you said, for biases.
So could I pipe in for a couple things?
Sure.
So this is our Go Forth assignments are always like this. So it's different. Every student has a different project, and they're all graded by their, what we call the lab prof, which is the person who manages that project. And we have a rubric which is split into various areas and includes things like response to previous comments and things like that. So that they are thinking and growing. And for a while, we used to try to norm the grading, between professors, and that took a huge amount of time and wasn't really good. So what we just started doing 2 terms ago, actually last spring might have been the first time, was to basically each, and it's not the same for your situation, but each lab prof has between 7 to 28 students or so, and they would decide where the A-B split was for their section, and so they wouldn't necessarily all line up. And so that makes it a lot easier, because then it doesn't matter so much if the different lab profs grade differently, as long as they are consistent among their own students.
And I'll just follow up with one quick thing that Adam Albright posted, which is both Canvas and Gradescope allow for rubric creation and lots of different rubric structures within them. So that allows sort of allows for commenting and reuse and sort of facilitating of the grading process that might be a little bit faster than sort of like getting on Zoom and sharing a screen around, hey, this was what I did, right? So that might be something that helps with your efficiency in terms of there's the technical, like, how do you get through grading all of these? Because that can be a little overwhelming for sure. Yeah.
I see 2 questions. Janet Sonnenberg has a question.
Hi, this is for Craig. Craig, you are taking notes as the presentations, as the videos are going. Do you give the students the transcript of your notes in real time, your real-time notes? Or do you only give them an overview at the end?
I give them an overview at the end. So as I'm doing the notes, I'll scratch out things that are impressions as I go along. And then I'll go back once through it, edit those, and then send them a short paragraph saying what I liked and things that I thought they could improve.
When we used to do, so we often had oral presentations in 671. We were going to switch to lightning talks last spring, and I'm going to want to talk to Craig about having them make video lightning talks. But we had, it was sort of a 4-part assessment sheet, feedback sheet, you know, split into technical, presentation, slides, and I forget what the last one was. And so we would have students peer review it and fill them out, and then also the staff would fill it out. And so we would then just give them the sheets as well as a grade with some other comments. So we were careful when we did that, of course, then that if you want to be careful what you write on the sheet. So, but it helped the students that the students don't usually put as detailed comments to their peers, but often they put good comments. So yeah.
Thanks. There is a question about equations in Gradescope Canvas. I'm going to ask Aaron to answer that one.
Yeah, so as somebody pointed out in the chat, for equation-dense subjects, there is some LaTeX integration with Canvas, and there are lots of options in terms of the types of inputs that you can have in both Gradescope and Canvas. So depending on what the functionality of the assignment is, one of the great things about Canvas assignment submissions is that basically anything can be structured as a submission, right? So and it loads in the grading platform in a way that allows you to annotate right on it. So you can sort of have people submit code and be able to annotate right on the code as part of the grading process. So it really depends on your individual use case as to what you're hoping for. There's no direct match for the edX type equation formulas that we see in maybe edX, if you're familiar with that. But there are some other workable options that people have come across in the last couple of weeks. And so if you have specific questions about that, again, please reach out and we can talk about your specific needs and what might make the most sense. We're happy to have those conversations.
Great. I don't see any more hands. There's a few dangling questions. This one just popped up. Are there tools to run student code? I'm not sure who posted it, what the context is. But I think we've responded to most of the other questions. If anybody, oh, I see another question.
I had another question, Janet. Sorry, I just re-raised my hand.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
If it's possible, I wanted to ask Craig, how do you go from your comments to a letter grade?
I'm a very easy grader. And so it's just a fact. It is just a gut call. You know, this is this student, I think, did a work. I kind of know it when I see it. And then students who kind of phone it in, you know, it's a B- or a C, but I'm an easy grader.
But like you said, it seems, so I did my undergraduates in Italy, and it seems very similar to the oral exam, to my oral exams experience there.
Yeah, I agree. I think an oral exam is a much better measure of a student's capability than a written exam. I like my final assessment to be more of a learning opportunity for them than an assessment opportunity for me. It's just because I become so unenthusiastic when it comes time to give them grades. What I want the student to do is buy into the final exercise instead of being, you know, hit with a stick. I'd rather kind of have them be hungry for the carrot, for lack of a better metaphor.
On a related note, I think it was last week, there was an EAMS, the Electronic Math Education Seminar on oral exams in calculus, introductory math or math classes. And so I'm sure that recording is available. Jen, will that be available? So it's EMES. And Jen, maybe if you could just put the link in, if you know it, if you could put the link in the chat, if you're looking for more information on oral exams. And then there is a question about where the video, if there'll be access to the video, and yes, there will. Ryan? Yes, we'll have access to the video. You're going to send the link out to attendees?
Yeah, we'll be sending that out right after this, after it's transcribed.
Great. I hope that, oh, I see more questions here. Just, we will try to get the questions answered if we haven't answered your questions. One quick question was, Craig, did the students upload anything to Canvas, or how did they share the video with you?
So we've changed the structure of 3016. Last semester, it was a 3-unit subject. In the following 2 semesters, it's 9-unit subjects. Canvas didn't exist the last time I did it, which was last spring. And so what I did is I had them upload it to a Google Drive, and then, a Google Drive. Next time they might upload it to Canvas, but I think Canvas doesn't give me that much space. So that's something I'm going to need to work out. I've posted many of the videos on a private website, and I know that they've posted other ones on OpenCourseWare. The problem with OpenCourseWare is that Sheba has to go back and have all the videos annotated for hearing impaired viewers, which is quite a labor. I may ask the students to do that in the future, thinking about it.
Great. Just want to call your attention to some information on the chat. We'll also send this, some of this around, but there's a Teach Remote site that's been co-created by TLL Open Learning, some information from IS&T. And so you can find that at the link that Deepa Shah, my colleague, has posted in the chat. Also want to call your attention to TA days. So if you have any grad students that will be TAing in the spring, you may be interested, they may be interested in participating in the TA days workshops. The link is there, also available on TLL's website. We have a blog, the Teaching and Learning Lab has a blog, and there's a plethora of information on Open Learning site as well. And Jen French has posted the link to the math talk on oral exams. And I think we may have covered everything, and we have 2 minutes to spare if we're not on MIT time. So again, I'd like to thank our panelists. I really appreciate hearing everything they've done and their creative ways of assessing students. And thank you all for coming. Fabulous turnout. And please reach out to us if you have any questions about assessments and assignments in this remote semester or beyond. Thank you.